and the tools and the software are going to change, and
Right.
and they're going to change multiple times in our careers, and they've already
Mhm.
changed. I mean, things were changing while I was in school. The tools were
Right.
changing, like from when I started school to when I finished school. Like there was like this big transition from like digital 2D software to digital 3D software. And like when I was working, I met artists that had transitioned multiple times, and some of them had started in, traditional media, and
Right.
then had been working so long that they had transitioned into digital 2D software, and then again transitioned into digital 3D software. And so like I've met people that have started their careers on pencil and then are now in ZBrush or whatever, right?
Right.
Um, and and so I guess that was sort of a lesson and something that was drilled into us, that the software and the tools will change, and you just have to accept that and stay up to date with that.
This following conversation is with Zach Berger, an esteemed creature designer and a valued member of the local 800 Art Directors Guild. Currently, Zach is working on the highly anticipated Avatar sequels under the direction of the legendary James Cameron. Throughout our discussion, Zach and I delved into a myriad of captivating topics, embarking on a journey that began with his formative years on the enchanting Pacific island of Saipan. We explored his educational pursuits at Art Center and his initial forays into the industry, which ultimately led him down the focused path of creature design. As our conversation progressed, we explored Zach's personal design principles and philosophy, as well as delving into more specialized subjects such as the art of presenting concepts to directors and the intricate process of designing the biology of Pandora. I kindly request you to share the details of this episode within your personal design communities, among your colleagues and peers. My intention is to provide a platform for incredibly talented and insightful artists, visionaries, and thinkers like Zach, who can profoundly influence and guide us in aligning our creative pursuits and our artistic aspirations in the right direction. Welcome to episode 5 of Art Chats, featuring the remarkable Zachary Berger, and I'm your host, Ayan DC. Let us begin. At this point, you're a pretty well-known name in the design industry as well, considering the projects that you worked on. But if you would like to give like a quick introduction about yourself, about your work.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me and for dealing with my crazy schedule. And I know we've sort of done like a little bit of, I guess, instant messenger tag a little bit.
Right, right.
You've been very patient with trying to get me on, so I really appreciate that. Yeah. So my name is Zach, or Zachary Berger. Concept artist, creature designer for the mostly film industry. I dabble a bit in other entertainment fields, games and such. Um, and yeah, I worked on, like you said, Kong Skull Island, some Marvel projects, Logan, yeah, just a bunch of movies, and most recently the Avatar Way of Water.
I mean, I recently purchased the book for The Art of the Way of Water, and it's almost like my daily coffee table book at this point. It's such an encyclopedia of just information around how to approach naturalistic designs, and it's been such an education for me for the last few weeks whenever I just take the book. And like it's also this point where in the evening when I'm having my cup of coffee, I'll open the book and I'll just glance through the images, and that's all it takes for me to run my creative world for the next 5 or 6 hours in the evening as well.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's nice to hear. It's so strange. It was a strange thing for me, and I guess for all of us that worked on the film, that it's like we worked on it for years, right? And so there
Right,
was there was a lot of work produced, and then to see it sort of distilled down into like a few,
right.
whatever it is, 100 pages. It's a small sliver of
And
the
I
overall
mean,
work.
kudos to the editors of the book as well, who has to really pick and choose the work that could go into this book. And I'm guessing with a few more sequels coming out. There'll be more books based on a
Yeah,
lot more extensive designs.
I think that's the overall hope. I don't know anything, but I would assume
Right.
that's the hope, is like, that's why they're keeping it all so close to the vest. Because yeah, it's like, I think even just, I can only speak for myself, but I think almost every artist on there had to produce hundreds, maybe thousands of images per artist.
Right.
And then I think I have like maybe a dozen in the book, something like
Right.
that. So yeah, that's just to give you the scope of like.
Right. So at what point in the project were you brought on as a creature designer? Were you there from the initial blue sky phase of the project, or when it
uh,
developed a little further, you were?
so I started in the beginning of 2017, I want to say, something like that. And
Oh, I
we
see.
were
Okay.
on, yeah, we were on the like that sort of second round of like, okay, we're like doing this now. We're ramping up and we're crewing up.
Right. Right.
I was in that sort of like, yeah, that round of people that came on, but there was already a ton of work produced prior to when I got there. So they had like, I could speak to the creatures, but they had like a decent idea of like the major creatures that they were going to do and
I
roughly
see.
what they were going to be. And then we were figuring out like the design, right? But it wasn't
I
like
see.
the like go crazy, produce like just cool stuff sort of phase. There was some of that, like for some of the fish and stuff. We were like we got a little bit of chance to explore, but for the major creatures, it was like they had kind of an idea of like, okay, these are big, like, 4 or 5 major creatures that
Right.
we kind of know this is a shark, this is kind of a whale, this is, exact that kind of thing. Um, so
Oh, interesting. Because because you recently did an interview with Bobby Chu as well for Schoolism, and that's where, thanks to that interview, I got a bit more information about you as as an artist and a human being as well. So I realized that you actually started your journey in the field of video games. So you were working with Sony at that point, and
yeah,
thinking of Avatar as a project which took this whole time period of around, I think, 7 8 years or something. It almost feels like it's like a triple A game production where you have to, like, years go by in the concept phase or the production phase. So
yeah, no, that's a good analogy, I think. Yeah, no, I've been on the project for over
wow.
6 years. But yeah, there's like my boss Dylan. I think he's been on it for 10. No, but it's totally like, I think, mm, I like to equate it, like, I guess a lot of film productions, like I tend to work like, I would say roughly like 6 months or so, maybe a
Right.
year on a production, and then you're a freelancer, so you're sort of they crew up, and then you like get hired and
Right.
you work for a bit, and then you're let go. I would say that this definitely culturally behaves more like, um, you know, uh, an animation studio or a game studio or something, where
Right.
it's like a group of people for years at a time.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's been my experience. It doesn't feel like any other live action film production I've ever been a part of. It does feel closer to my experience in games.
Right. 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 But also, because thinking of studios like Sony or working for a production team for Disney, it feels like you've already hit like pretty impressive career milestones when it comes to starting off your professional journey in this field. So how was your journey into the industry as well? Like, what was your education like? I want to kind of go into how you started off into this field as well.
Okay. Okay, where to start?
Okay,
Uh
let's take you to your time as, like, even before college education, because I found out that you are from this small island called Saipan, and
yes.
when I was listening about that, the one thing that I do, I immediately go on Google search and search that place, and immediately it felt like, okay, this is like French Polynesian waters, essentially, the aquatic life and the beauty of that space, the turquoise colors, and it felt like you are the perfect person to design a world present underwater as well. So how was life in Saipan for you?
Oh man, as a teenager, I don't think I really, or even as a child so much. I don't think I really appreciated it.
Okay.
I think, yeah, like I think it would be more fun now as like an adult to go back and like, I don't know, now that I've lived in like a big city and stuff, I'm like,
Right.
oh, I don't think I like appreciated that as much. But at the time, I think I would say I was really bored and ready to get out. It's a really, really small community of
Right.
people, and really just tiny geographically. Like I sort of feel like I had seen everything growing up there.
Mhm.
I don't know if your audience knows, but I think I want to say it's something like 15 miles long or something, like
Oh
in
wow.
terms
Okay.
of by like a couple miles wide. Like
Right.
it's really small. And at the time, I want to say it was roughly 60,000 people living there.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
so it's like it feels like a small town, but it's surrounded by water and you can't ever leave.
So essentially,
So
everyone knows everyone over there in
yeah,
some
and
way.
everybody knows everybody's business and like,
Right.
sort of dirty laundry and we had like one movie theater,
Right.
that when I was growing up, and I think one, maybe two at one point. McDonald's, I think.
Oh wow.
Like
Okay.
just to give like an example of something, like
Right.
that was it, right? Like I think when we moved there, I want to say they were building the first like street light, like
So
and I could be misremembering some of the stuff, but gives you a picture at least.
so for a place which is tinier than a normal city that you currently live in, I believe that there was not much of a conversation about the entertainment industry over there, or was it there?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, nothing. Yeah, I mean, there was no context at all for that. I mean, that just felt so, at least growing up, to me, I was always interested in that stuff, but it always
Mm-hmm.
felt like something that happened very far away.
Right.
And just to give your audience some context, Saipan is the U.S. territory, so it is part of the United
Right.
States. So there is that. I was fortunate enough, to sort of like be able to travel to the mainland U.S. when I was a child.
Right.
Um, but yeah, just it always felt like the entertainment industry, I was, games and movies and stuff, it was stuff that I was interested in, but it didn't ever felt like it was something that I could sort of participate in. I think it was in high school I got really into, you know, I think I was reading some gaming magazines and stuff, and then it sort of like clicked for me that like, oh, you can people do this for a living. They
Right.
do this as a job, and so I found this small school in Seattle. I looked at a bunch of schools when my parents really wanted me to do this sort of traditional 4-year college thing, and then I
Right.
somehow sort of convinced them to go to this like game design type school up in Seattle, and that's where I landed and did that for a couple of years. It was a like I guess when I was sort of looking into the school, they kind of had two paths, and it was one was art and one was programming, and I was like,
Right.
programming does not sound like something I'm interested in. So I always sort of drew when I was a child and a teenager, but it wasn't like I never took like super formal art classes growing up.
Right.
Um, so that was my first exposure to that. So I sort of went into the art side of things at that small school up in Seattle, and sort of quickly decided that that school wasn't for me. Um, and I was attending one of these like industry workshop type things, just for
Right.
the entertainment industry, while I was uh, at this school up in Seattle, this art school, just on a break.
What event was
And
this?
oh, it was, I think the one I'm thinking of, it was like one of the massive black
All right. So Justin
workshops.
Kaufman,
Yeah.
Kardovsky. Right. Right. Right.
Yeah. At the time, there weren't that many. This is, now whatever it is, 15
It's been a
years ago.
while.
Yeah. At the time, there wasn't that many of those kind of things. So it was
Right.
like now there's tons of them. But
Mhm.
I just remember going to that and sort of having my mind blown by just like the quality of other like students and stuff out there. Like there's just so many good people and so many amazing portfolios.
Right.
And I was seeing, I think I had been in art school like a year. And so it was still developing, and it just, my skills were not there yet. But and I just remember going to like a sort of portfolio review table, and then there was like, I don't remember who was doing it, but some professionals were reviewing portfolios, and then there's multiple of these portfolios that were coming up, and they were getting these like really high marks, from these professionals, and it was all like concept type work.
Right.
And a lot of these people were students, and they were all coming from the same school.
All right.
And I was like, what school is that? Because they were all these professionals were like really blown away by these portfolios, and they were all from the same school. So it turned out to be Art Center in Pasadena. So I sort of researched that and sort of shifted gears a little bit and decided to quit the school up in Seattle and apply to Art Center. There was a lot of it was a big leap of faith, I guess, because I'd already sort of sunk some money into the school up in Seattle, and then
Art Center is not it's a pretty expensive
school.
affair as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And I didn't have like money saved up or anything, so it was just like my parents helped me out a little bit, but I had sort of blown through everything they had helped me with. So yeah, I was like starting over, going and just sort of signing my life away and going into like a ton of debt.
Was it tough convincing your parents for you to take up this line of work? Considering that they do not probably know very well about this industry that exists.
Yeah, there was definitely some hesitation. I think at this point, so I guess when I started at the school up in Seattle, it was not particularly focused to concept. I think it was just like a general like game art sort of thing. And so I was learning some like rudimentary, beginner like 3D asset creation, some modeling, some, little bit of animation, that kind of thing. But it was kind of unfocused and kind of all over the place. And then I sort of quickly found out that I wanted to sort of, if I could hack it, sort of pursue the concept direction. And at the time it was very, at least to me, very new. And it felt like something that like very senior, at least talking to some industry people, it felt like something that was like very senior people got into. Like it wasn't something that they hired people like right out of school for.
Right.
So I was like, okay, well, I want to like position myself to go in that direction, but thinking that I would not achieve that for a while. And then sorry, to get back to your question, it did take a little bit of massaging, convincing my parents to sort of let me pursue this. My parents come from a more traditional background. My dad's an attorney and went to law school and stuff, so they kind of are more familiar with that more traditional route. Decided to quit the school in Seattle, packed up all my belongings in my little beat up car and drove down, including the cat, drove down to to Los Angeles, and started Art Center at the started in there was this program that like a lot of people that got into concept were coming out of, called entertainment design.
Right.
And it was at the time helmed by Scott Robertson.
Right.
And it just seemed like the quality bar of that particular program was just really high. And so I was very like keen on getting into that. But at the time you couldn't start in that. So I started in illustration, did like a year of just like oil painting and stuff.
Wow. Okay.
yeah, and charcoal drawings and that kind of thing,
Right.
and then switched into entertainment, and then did that entertainment design, and then did
Right.
that for a while, till I started working.
Right. I feel like Art Center is a college where the benchmark is really set by the insane faculty over there. Like folks like Scott Robertson, Tim Flattery, like they are veteran designers working in the industry and just crazy creative geniuses. So how was the communication between students and folks like Scott while he was teaching you? What were the conversations like between you guys?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I guess I can't speak to how it is now. It was just like a crazy time,
Right.
but you're right. It was like I kind of feel like I kind of came in at just like this, sort of timed it somewhat perfectly. I think there
Right.
was maybe a couple years before or after me where things were also pretty
Right.
amazing, but it felt like this sort of Goldilocks time there where Scott was sort of at the helm, and then he had designed this program which was in its infancy at the time, like
Right.
brand new, this entertainment focused program. Because I guess prior to that there was like people just sort of, they did illustration or they did industrial design,
Right. Right.
and then they would sort of like try and just draw spaceships in their industrial design program or whatever, and then sort of find their way into the entertainment industry. And this was, at least to my knowledge, the first program that was very built from the ground up, designed to get people into entertainment, concept design, at like an accredited school. And so Scott sort of built this bespoke program, and he at the time was accepting very few students, and so that's why I had to jump through these hoops of like starting an illustration and then applying in. So there's a portfolio review process to get into the school, and then there's a separate portfolio review process to get into the program.
I see.
So
Okay.
they whittled down the number of students. So I think I was in a class of like, I want to say it was like 30 students or something. And that was all they accepted for the year.
Right.
And then they
Was the number because they were still trying to figure out what this course would be like, or it was just because only the
no,
best get
it
to
was
come in?
yeah, it was Scott's sort of brainchild of like, he wanted to design this program that was very focused, and so he wanted the students to be permitted to like have, like you're saying, like a lot of one-on-one time with the instructors. And he was he would pick instructors out of industry that were currently working, and I think that was some of the secret sauce of the program, of like, he would pick people who were currently working on films, and then say, come teach a class for me once a week. It's 3 hours of your time or whatever, but then you got like current information, right? You got to hear from people who are currently working about current industry sort of practices,
Right.
as opposed to some instructors, which we still had plenty that were like this, that were like, they were full-time instructors, and then so like some of their, the industry moves so fast that some of their information might be like applicable to when they were working, but if they haven't been working for a couple decades, then that information may not be as up to date. So I think that was sort of the thinking, was like, keep the class sizes small and then pull people from industry. And then he had sort of designed the program that was, there was a like a very thoughtful approach to like the order of the classes. Like, we'll do this class first and this sort of foundational classes first, and then but it was all centered around entertainment, as opposed to other programs that were more, I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is like, it was so interesting. It was night and day for me to go from a school that I felt like I was getting this very general, vague education in art, and it was kind of like touching all things, into this one that was like very, very focused, and very like particular in the order that you took classes, and the specifics of what each class was teaching you and building upon itself. Like it was very well put together program. And now I think it's been sort of copied a lot. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of programs out there that I think sort of took that approach, but at the time it was very, at least to my knowledge, very novel, um, and and definitely seemed to sort of prepare me. I mean, I can't
Right.
complain for where I ended up. Um,
Right. Of course. I
turns out,
mean, yeah. But so right now you work as a creature designer. I feel creature design is a very specific line
yeah,
of work, right? So when did that start resonating with you? Was that during your education at Art Center, or as you kind of started stepping into the industry,
yeah,
you found your niche essentially?
yeah. I mean, I was always interested in, I think, like characters
Mm-hmm.
and creatures, and then it turns out like as I sort of learned about more about the industry, like it it um I guess in the film industry it's like to a lot of times I mean it changes from project to project, but a lot of
Right.
times it's like to work on characters you're kind of working on the costume design,
Of course.
right? So you're working for a costume designer, and then like creatures are their own separate discipline from that. So there's these like specific niches, and so there's artists that tend to work on sets, and there's artists that tend to
Mm-hmm.
work on vehicles, or that
Props
sort of like,
and everything.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And those are like all pretty specific separate disciplines. There's artists that cross over,
Uh-huh.
um but I guess once I sort of discovered that, I was like, oh, I got really excited by creatures. I just found out in school, and the character stuff became less interesting to me than the creature stuff. But I still like explored it all, and can do and did do environment stuff and set stuff, and props and vehicles and blah blah blah. But
Right.
so yeah, I don't know if that answers the
No, no, of course it
question. I
does.
think I lost my train of thought
No, no,
just rambling.
it definitely does because the one thing that I also found very interesting because as I'm researching, I'm looking through your Instagram posts and everything. You're one of the artists who really gives very interesting educational explainers to your images, and I almost get a glimpse of how the thinking process has been for you as you're working on a certain design task for a certain concept for a film, right? So do you find that interest in teaching at some point? Does that something is that something that you want to pursue at some point?
I have taught a little bit in the
Uh-huh.
past. Just like I a lot of my friends run these like smaller, like more a la carte schools, like where
Right,
it's just like you know single class sort of entertainment stuff.
right.
I haven't. How do I want to say this? I find that I am at this point in my career, like teaching at least rather than other than just maybe occasionally is
Mhm.
not something that I'm that interested in right now.
Right, right, right.
um, like occasionally I teach like little classes or like workshops and stuff, and that stuff is interesting to me. I have
Hmm.
found that when I was teaching more frequently, I just was not enjoying it as much as just working or
Right.
yeah. So at least for me, where I am right now, it's so interesting. Like I would take, getting back to, I guess, sort of the prior discussion, it was interesting to find that like there were instructors, just because someone is a talented artist or skilled artist doesn't make them a good instructor.
I agree,
And
100%.
and yeah. So there were definitely people who were, but like that person who, I don't know, like there are people who are devoted instructors who are, it's very good that they're, that's their calling and that's what they want to do, and they
Right.
put their all into it. And I don't know if that was, in my experience, at least so far, that's for me. But I do
Mhm.
enjoy occasionally teaching little workshops or smaller classes and stuff.
Right. Right. Because I
Yeah.
think I think the education side like intrigues me because we've noticed the industry uh, it develops quite exponentially fast
Yeah.
with the tools developing over and over again. Within a year, you receive so many different updates as to how to even use certain new tools. So
Yeah.
I wonder how the education system around design adapts to that as well. because like in times like today, I don't really know what role does art center essentially play as a pillar, like an educational pillar essentially. But what would you think as to like what is that unique experience at art center that you can kind of took with you and it still kind of stays with you at this point?
Well, the philosophy at the time for that program was,
Mm-hmm.
and this is something I sort of still subscribe to, is like the techniques and the tools and the software are going to change, and
Right,
they're going to change multiple times in our careers, and they've
mm-hmm.
already changed. I mean, things were changing while I was in school. The tools were
Right,
changing, like from when I started school to when I finished school. Like there was like this big transition from like digital 2D software to digital 3D software. And like when I was working, I met artists that had transitioned multiple times, and some of them had started in, traditional media, and
right,
then had been working so long that they had transitioned into digital 2D software, and then again transitioned into digital 3D software. And so like I've met people that have started their careers on pencil and then are now in ZBrush or whatever, right?
right,
Um, and and so I guess that was sort of a lesson and something that was drilled into us, that the software and the tools will change, and you just have to accept that and stay up to date with that.
right,
But what they sort of drilled into us was that what will separate you and will set you apart is your thinking and
mm-hmm.
your sort of design approach. And I think that's something that has been very um, I've been very fortunate in my career, and I think that so far at least, and I think that that's something that's been really helpful for me. Is just I try at least to bring something to the table other than just my wrist.
Right,
Um, and obviously, like the designs are um, the brainchild of the director or the production designer, but I still am able to bring something to the table. I'm not just sometimes I am, but sometimes I am um, uh, sometimes I guess I'm just executing their vision,
mm-hmm.
the client's vision, but then other times they're asking me for my input, and
Right,
it's a collaborative sort of problem solving. And I think that's something that has sort of given me a little bit of I would hope at least like a competitive edge of
mm-hmm.
like, regardless of what medium is in vogue or what everybody's working in, like the you can't replicate. Um, I'm the only one that can offer my services,
Right,
right? Because it's my brain that I'm bringing to the table, right? Like my sort of design sense and aesthetic, um and and I think with uh very successful people that I've worked with who are more senior than me, I've noticed that with them, right? Like
mm-hmm.
that they're good problem solvers. They have interesting ideas,
Right,
um, and they're not just like painting pretty pictures, right? That's not
because
the only thing that they bring to the table,
because
right?
because I guess design at the core is a problem solving job essentially,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But also like considering, okay, if I have to create like a separation between your education, your time when you were learning these things in school compared to the time when you're learning things while working at a job, was there a process of unlearning certain things that went through, as to like you had certain preconceived notions about the industry at that point, but you found out that it changed the moment you stepped in, essentially?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good question, actually. Not something I thought about, but uh, I would say that I had this perception that, you come out of this like, somewhat very focused and elite design school, and then you think
Right,
that, oh, everybody's gonna think this way, right? Like of like, oh, we're trying to come up with these really avant-garde, interesting,
right,
design choices. And then what I noticed, especially especially working in Hollywood, but even in games and whatever, like there's a joke that in Hollywood that everybody is in a race to be second.
Interesting.
Yeah, so like no one, with some exceptions, but no
Right.
one wants to like stick their neck out and like
I
try
see.
something new. And everybody's waiting for someone else to prove something works and
Right.
is interesting, and then everybody wants to be the first one to copy it, right? So like you
Hmm.
that's why you don't see like you'll see like well, so for example, like some advice I give to like, aspiring students is like
Mhm.
look for these trends, right? Like if Amazon is producing a big new Lord of the Rings series that they're dumping a
Right.
bunch of money in, then you know that like if that's successful, then there's going to be
This
a
will be
ton
basically
of
the Bible,
fantasy.
right?
Yeah, so like everybody else is going to start doing some fantasy projects if that's successful. And Lord of the Rings, that Amazon Lord of the Rings series is probably not the best example because that was
Right.
directly because of Game of Thrones, right? Like Game of
Right.
Thrones does this interesting new take on fantasy, and
Hmm.
then suddenly you see all of these
Right.
dark, gritty fantasy projects crop up in film and in games, right? Like,
Of
and
course.
so there was Wheel of Time and the Amazon Lord of the Rings thing, and
Right.
uh, several Game of Thrones sequels, right? Because that was so
Right.
successful. Um, so yeah, I guess that's a long-winded way of saying that I guess I was under the assumption that like everyone wants to do something new and unique, and no, that was not the case. Everybody is sort of
Right.
like um, working uh, on stuff that they know will work, right? Because it makes sense, right? If you're dumping like a ton of money into a project, you kind of want some assurances that it's like been tried a little bit, right? So
Hmm.
and proven out a little bit.
Also, I
Yeah.
believe that as you enter the industry, I feel you suddenly are very painfully made aware of the concept of time and deadlines.
Yeah, yeah.
And not just that, it's also about how much a hard deadline at times is not really a hard deadline, because like it's really difficult to pull the plug on a creative process unless it really hits certain requirements for the director or the production designer. So like in terms of like when you were in art center, right, like the way you perceive deadlines to be, which was an assignment deadline, compared to working on a project like Avatar, where you really have to spend a lot of time thinking out details about a creature. And even if there's something which is required almost immediately, but you like there's the whole process of delaying that more and more as till like it really hits certain requirements by James Cameron as well. So like how was your transition to understanding even deadlines and your way of working within certain time frames?
Well, I don't know if Avatar, my experience on Avatar
It's
is the
probably
best example
right.
because
I
it's
figure so,
yeah.
yeah.
That's been like as I'm sure everyone knows, it's been forever for the movie
Right,
to get
right.
made. But my experience on most films is
Hmm.
crazy deadlines, like
I
crazy
see.
fast deadlines. The film industry, at least in my experience, in comparison to the games industry, is much faster.
Right.
Games, at least in my experience, and I have fairly limited experience in games, but it was a little bit more relaxed in terms of schedule. Again, I think because of those long project lead times.
Right.
Um, but yeah, totally. I think that in school they did try and instill some like sense of like deadlines on us,
Hmm.
but it doesn't. Nothing sort of prepares you for
Right.
the actual industry. I think the worst experiences I've had are actually in the advertising industry.
Oh
Um,
yeah, the deadlines are even harsher in the advertising
yeah,
side of things. Yeah.
yeah. Just like if I've done some commercial work, like
Right.
for TV commercials kind of thing, and that stuff is always like, oh, why did I take this job? Like, it's just like the turnarounds are just so insane. And yeah, so like yeah, I guess to answer your question, there is no real preparation. It's just sort of trial by fire a little bit
Right.
of like feeling it out, of like like you're saying, like, because sometimes they ask for something that's like, oh, this is a deadline, and then you're like, is it really, or is it just sort of a fabricated, um, you're trying to
Right.
instill some sense of urgency in me, but so yeah, I guess that I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it
Sorry, I
does. It
lost my
does.
train of
It
thought.
was also probably a kind of a confusing question to ask as well, but because uh, yes, of course, Avatar is probably not the best example when you have to discuss timelines and all. But because you've also worked on so many different projects, and as you were also talking about having a certain specific voice in terms of you as a creature designer, I wanted to know more about how you perceive design. Because for creature design, for example, if you're designing a, a cat or creature which was created by nature, right? Nature on its own designs in fractals or in progressions, and like everything's kind of interconnected with each other, right? And I feel like the design principles that we are taught, which is basically really simplifying down what nature
Mm,
does masterfully. That's why almost all kinds of design becomes like biomimicry in some way. So what have you noticed as you've observed, like your references, your research as you design a certain cat? What are the things, what are the tropes that you look for essentially? For example, if you were designing another living organism from the world of Pandora, right? What kind of check marks do you normally keep for yourself in order to hit, certain requirements?
yeah, I mean, again, I think that's a different answer depending on the project I'm on, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like, like it can depend a lot on the the production designer or director, or in the case of
See.
games, like art director I'm working for, and their sort of like aesthetic um choices. So I've worked on projects where it's like the director or whoever just thinks this idea is cool or this aesthetic is cool, so like do something like that, like let's put
Right.
this on the creature because it's cool. And
Mm-hmm.
then you sort of like um you try and back into some logic for that.
Right.
I think that um the design principles on Avatar sequels, and I guess the first film too, which I was not a part of, but I assume it was similar. Um, is sort of twofold. It's like one is, does it fulfill the story need, and then the other is, does it have some um, like some internal logic within the rules that have been established for the world, right? So
Right.
like you're saying, like, does it make sense in terms of um its own Pandoran biology, right? Like
Right.
everything is approached as if it were from this like National Geographic goes to another planet sort of perspective.
Right. Right.
Um, and so we're always trying to think in that way, of like things have uh, a logic to them. The story needs come first
Mhm.
sometimes. So it's like, oh, we need this creature to do this thing, so we try and design the biology around that,
Right.
um, and then back into some logic. But it's always like this approach uh, of uh, really trying to have some justification for all the design decisions. Like I think I heard a story on the first film, like they were designing, the first Avatar
Right.
film, they were
Mhm.
designing like some early versions of some like of the RDA sets, right?
Right.
And they would show Jim like some mock-ups of the sets or whatever. It's just, here's some
Mhm.
panels of the walls, and then here's some cables going down, and here's some cut lines and or whatever in the walls, and then Jim would go and go, what does that cable do, and what does
Oh,
that pipe do?
wow. All right.
And yeah, so you have to like sort of like either tap dance and sort of bullshit your way through
Right.
some explanation right on the spot, or what we sort of learned is like, yeah, I want to make these decisions and have at least what I learned in my process of pitching stuff to him was like, have thought through that stuff already, right?
Right.
Before going into the room with him. So it's like if this fin is there
Nothing
on
cannot be
this,
unintentional,
right? Nothing
essentially.
is
Right.
arbitrary. Yeah. It's like, why does it have this? What does it
Right.
do? Um, and and I think that's really, I mean, I already sort of gravitated towards, like, personally sort of gravitated towards that kind of style of design,
Mhm.
as opposed to the, like, I think this looks cool, let's put
Yeah.
lots of teeth on it and just because it's cool.
I think a term that gets used around is basically shape juicing
Yeah.
for something very cool.
Which is, that stuff is fun,
It
and
works as
I've
well.
worked on
Yeah.
I've worked on projects like that, and it's just not, in a vacuum, it's not my
Right.
particular personal aesthetic, but
Mhm.
I tend to gravitate more towards the, like, the 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 real, like, science end of science fiction,
Right.
right? Like, um, things have a justification, things have a logic. Even if it's like an internal logic. So it's like, oh, the bones of the creatures on Pandora are this sort of carbon fiber like material, right? So, like, how does that
Right.
affect things, right? So you've established this design, like, choice of the
Mhm.
creatures, um so, like, how does that then affect your decision making?
Right.
um
Right.
so even if that initial spark of, like, this concession you're making is fiction in the science fiction, you are then justifying it with science behind it, right? Its own
Right.
internal logic. um if that makes sense.
It does. But I also think probably that also plays into your role as someone who has to pitch a design, right? Like, for example, like how has that process been for you for different projects where you will create something, but then you really have to sell the director on picking an
Yeah.
effort
No,
designs to
and
make it
we've
on the
had that.
screen, right?
Yeah, we've had that. I mean, I've definitely had that where the director is, like, on the fence between a couple decisions, or the production designer or whatever,
Mhm.
and you definitely have the one that you like.
Right.
You try and sort of play some, sort of psychological, chess or whatever, to sort of
Have you
steer them.
intentionally done like a bad one so that they don't?
No, I've learned not to do that, because you don't want
That's
that
good.
to get picked,
Right.
right?
Oh, that's the worst
Um,
one.
that's the one that gets picked. Um, No, you got to be happy with everything you present,
Right.
is what I've learned. Don't just present stuff for the sake of, like, quantity.
Of course.
Um, but uh, yeah, I guess I forgot the question. It you're trying to, like, uh when you're when I'm trying to pitch stuff to, like, a director or something, what I if I have the time, what I usually try and do is, they'll have, like, some, obviously, like, their own ideas,
Right.
and if I have a certain amount of time, and we're going back to sort of deadlines, is, like, do their vision first.
Right.
And then if I have more time, I'll do the sort of production designer's
Interesting.
vision of things. And then if I have more time, I'll do my vision. And
Right.
then so, usually if I present too many options, it can be sort of, and I've learned this just through experience, it could be sort of overwhelming. I've done
Mhm.
these rounds where I present 50 versions of things, and then
Wow.
the um, you know, I don't know if it's helpful. So
I
it's
think
almost
also
like,
it also comes down to almost like picking one aspect of a design that works and what doesn't work from another one. So it's just basically mishmashing multiple things, basically batching different parts from different designs, and it becomes
right.
something a little
Yeah,
clunky,
which,
maybe.
yeah, it can work. I've certainly had good results with that method too. But yeah, I
Mhm.
think more recently anyway, the philosophy has been to present fewer things, but they are clearer. Like, there's a clear sort of
Mhm.
spectrum of, like, from A to Z,
Mhm.
but you're only presenting A and then whatever is in the middle of the alphabet. G and X and Z, right? Like, four or
Right.
five options. And and then there's that whole spectrum. But yeah, what I try and do is the director's vision, production designer's vision, and then mine. Um, and if I'm lucky, sometimes some of my ideas make it in.
Right.
Um, but you always want to, especially with a director like Jim, you always want to have their stuff. Like if they have, he has tends to have a very clear idea of what he
Right.
wants. So you definitely want to execute that first, and then
Mhm.
as time allots, you sort of like move down the list.
But someone like
Um,
James Cameron, who I've heard this on multiple conversations where people have talked about him, even when I've attended art events and I had conversations with artists who worked under him. They always said that it's an interesting experience working with him because he can do your job better than you at some
yeah,
level, right?
yeah.
So for
No,
someone like him, like what was the communication with him? Like how would he brief you guys? Was it through
it
metaphors
was.
or specific directions? How was that experience?
I mean, he liked to say that like he had sort of an idea of like this is generally what the creature is going to do in the story and what sort of
Right,
like where it what the earth metaphor is for the creature. So
right,
for the example, the Tulkun in the Avatar sequels is, this is the metaphor is it's a whale,
mm-hmm.
right? But then he's sort of like he would say that the way he describes it is like he's written that down in the script that it's a sort of fulfills the role of a whale in the
Right,
script, but then he doesn't really know what the specifics of that are. He
uh-huh.
knows what the creature is going to have to do to fulfill story needs in the script, but then he sort of describes it, I guess, as like it's blurry to him, and then as he's working with artists, it's
Right,
coming into focus, right? So
mm-hmm.
it's like he can sort of like see it getting sharper in his mind of like
Mm-hmm.
what this design is. Um, so what we're trying to do is like present like a range of options for him, and then he sort of whittles down,
Oh,
and it's sort of a discovery process with the production designer, with the concept artist,
right.
um, and with him, and then he definitely has very clear ideas, but like some of it will be him after sitting with stuff for a while and seeing what he's liked and disliked, him sort of he'll go away and he'll sort of react to things, and he'll come
Mm-hmm.
back with his own sort of set of sketches, and he'll be like, this
Right,
is what I think the something like this is what I think the fin design should be, and then you iterate on that sort of
right.
as a jumping off point for the particular fin for this particular creature.
Mm-hmm.
And you start with his, and then you do the like I said, the progression,
Right.
and then you say like, hey Jim, this is how this fin is working, or this set of fins is working on this creature, and then
Mm-hmm.
he'll see the options of all the fins, and then he'll pick from there, and then you've sort of made that decision, and then
Very interesting.
continue to move, and then things get massaged even further as he sort of sees it working in the whole. So it's like this iterative back and forth process. I mean, we even had stuff where we would do like so I did a lot of work on the skim wing
Mm-hmm.
in Way of Water, and a lot of the process was um,
Before you continue, Zach, I wanted to kind of point out why I love that design of the skin wing. I mean, it's
well, thank
in,
you.
in in terms of clarity, it's amazing, but on I think my third rewatch of the film and scenes from it, I remember seeing a mechanism near the mouth of the
Yeah,
skin wing, right? Where if the mouth opens like that, the mechanism kind of pushes us downwards. And I
yeah.
was like, I've never seen that in anything, like any kind of entertainment design work. I've never seen that level of detail as to it's almost like it's a mechanical engineering process that went on in designing these creatures. So I really appreciated that specific design choice.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I mean that particular one was a little bit of a throwback to the Banshee, the Ikron in the first film, because
Right.
it kind of has that sort of flange that comes
Uh-huh.
from like a barracuda or something.
Right.
Um, and yes, at one point, like the design of the creature was going to be a lot closer to a banshee, at least in sort
Right.
of like the shape of the face, because it was supposed to be this sort of evolutionary
Mhm.
offshoot.
I see.
But so we went through multiple rounds of like how much banshee do we throw into this design,
Right.
um, and so that was one of the things that I got through that was like a little bit of a throwback.
Mhm.
Um, I forgot where I was prior to this.
No, I think we
the
were just discussing about, yeah, as like you were talking about the skimwing in general, yeah.
um oh yeah, I guess what I was saying was the design process with Jim.
Right.
Some of it was um I had like a we had like a fairly decent working overall
Mhm.
form, and then he would bring like one of our lead animators. I think he's now an animation supervisor on the film.
I see.
um and he came in and he would work over, like, they would do sort of a quick dirty rig of some of my ZBrush sculpts and do
Right.
animation tests of, like,
Interesting.
because Jim was like already thinking about how the creature would move, like
Right.
the animation is a big part of the design, and then based on how that looks, the animation tests that would then go circle back to me and influence the form, right? Like,
Right.
so there
Right.
was like this feedback loop of working with animators, because he's all about like um, how the creature moves is a big part of the design aesthetic, and he's thinking about that so early on in the design process. It's not like this separate sort of like, okay, we are done designing the creature, now go animate it.
Right.
It's this loop, and I think that really enriched the design, because in the case of the skim wing, it was like it was going to be this big, the metaphor was always like, let's do a big flying fish, right?
Right.
But then you're like, well, okay, a flying fish is this tiny creature and it moves in this very specific, or tiny animal
Right.
it moves in this very specific way, but how do you scale that up? And so there was a lot of like figuring that out, of like, it it can feel really clunky, right, if done improperly, right? And so there was all this feedback with the animators, and then we had to like have a writer on top of it, so that was sort of the scale of it, right?
Right.
And and the flying fish animal like sort of comes out of the water at this kind of, when it's skimming
Right.
on top of the water, it's like this kind of very awkward, like sort of
Uh-huh.
45-degree angle, and so how do you make that look cool?
I was actually very
um
impressed with that decision making behind, because that kind of animation, that kind of movement could very easily go wrong if not constructed
exactly,
really well thought out. It's a slippery
exactly,
slope
yeah.
when it comes to these things.
And I have plenty of versions where it looks bad. um and 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 that was, a testament to
Of
their
course.
sort of thinking in house, and their sort of approach to design, and also just their the luxury of working for such a big project that has the time to figure that kind of
Of
stuff out,
course.
and to
Of
bring
course.
an animator on so early on in the design process, right? Like,
Mhm.
that's a luxury that comes with time and budget, right?
Of course.
Because you're spinning a lot of wheels early on, right? You're 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 paying people, right? Like, to sort
Mhm.
of sit there and iterate, and so that was just the luxury of being working on such a big project,
Right.
um, which is not the case everywhere and all the time. But um, yeah, I think the design is enriched because of it, in my
Of course,
opinion.
and also like interesting because as you were mentioning, the back and forth process between figuring out the animation and again having those inputs come back into the design phase as well. I feel like it's also almost like the benefit of having the technology catching up, where it's almost real time production, that we can see something on screen and at least go back to the pre-production stage of it and
Yeah,
rework certain things, which was a little difficult few years ago, I guess.
yeah, and it just feels like, just in general, like the film industry is moving in that direction, right?
Right.
Like a lot of people I know, like I've been sort of stuck on this project, which is its own little
Right.
microcosm, its own little bubble. But a lot of people I know, like, who are concept artists, are like, they have transitioned completely into Unreal, right?
Right.
And they're um they're designing, like, their design of a set, which at one point would have been like a 2D illustration, is like this
Right.
fully realized sort of environment design, as if it were a game, right?
Yeah.
And
They
that you
had to
can fly
transition into
through.
like a production artist role as well
Yeah,
as, yeah.
yeah, or at least the line has gotten very blurry, right?
Right. Right. Right.
um and even for what I do, like they're asking me for like pretty resolved you know sculpts, models of the creatures, and it's something that I wouldn't have been capable of as at one point in my career, like the the level of finish on my concept sculpts was more of very loose, right, and
Right.
more of like a just sort of sketchy sort of idea of like, here's vaguely what I'm thinking, and then I would paint over it a lot. But
Right.
more and more, it's like the concept sculpt is like at least on this project, is pretty
It's almost a final
resolved.
asset that you just pass it on to the next team.
Yeah, I don't want to definitely don't want to discount the work that the
Of
VFX
course,
team does, because they bring it to just like a whole nother level that I are
I agree.
fully out of my capabilities as a sole artist. But it is interesting to see that like at one point I would have done a here is my turnaround sheet or whatever, right, like a
Right.
2D multiple angles of the same design images, and now it's like, hey, we want like a pretty resolved ZBrush sculpt.
Right.
um yeah, that it's certainly not VFX quality, but it's much more than I would have anticipated, even a few years ago.
What resonates with you more, the process of taking all your design, uh, taking your design to final, or like a strong 3D asset, or the stage where you basically explore through sketches? Like, who are you as a designer? More of a 3D technical person, or the creative on paper? I want to figure out all the through sketches and drawings.
I flip flop back and forth, to be honest with you.
Hmm.
Like it just depends on where I'm excited by all of it, to be honest with
Right.
you. I guess so. I guess I don't have like an either or sort of answer.
Hmm.
Um, Definitely where I'm at on this project, it's been more of the like finalizing, detailing stuff
Right.
stage for quite a while. So I do like to dabble, when I can, in the more like blue sky, you know, sketch stuff out stage.
Right.
But that can get I've been there for a while too, and that can get frustrating too, because you never resolve anything and you never feel like anything's like ever going to make it into the final product.
Hmm.
I've been on projects where I'm on very early on, and it's uh you're like, and they're just like, just make stuff, and you're like, oh,
Right.
this is exciting, but then you're like, is this ever going to come out? Like, is what I'm doing now like worth any value? So
Right.
it's fun I guess where I'm at now, where it's like you're more on the final, like I like to say I'm detailing out creature nostrils on
Right.
the that's sort of my job. But at least what I'm doing, I know, is like it makes it on screen, right,
Right.
and it looks very close to what I did, which is a really surreal feeling, right, to see
Mhm.
that on an IMAX screen. Um,
I was curious to know, like, on a personal level, when you first watched the movie on a big screen, like, because Avatar was built to be seen at that scale, and
yeah.
seeing your years of hard work going into this, how was that experience when you watched with your family members, just being there? Like, how was that for you?
So my first viewing was with the cast and crew
Right?
screening. So like I think shortly before the like official domestic release, we
Hmm.
like all went to a theater, like the whole crew.
Right?
And it's funny because my wife she's doing her master's right now, so she was unable to make it. She was in the middle of
I
finals,
see.
so it was
All right.
just me solo. But so I called her afterwards. And she's like, "So how did it go?" And I was like, "Well, to be honest with you, like I don't know if I sort of processed it all. Like it was so surreal to me that I just like it was sort of an out of body experience. Like it was
Wow. Okay.
um like I just don't know what to think right now. So
Wow.
it was almost like the second or third viewing where I feel like I actually got to enjoy the film.
Right.
um because yeah, the first one was just like my brain just didn't know how to take it in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it
You
does.
you're so attached to something, you've worked on it for so long,
Right.
and you really hope it's gonna resonate and people are gonna like it, and it does okay.
Mhm.
um and then so she, I'm talking to my wife, and she's like, so was it a good movie? And I was like, I couldn't tell you. I don't know. It's you'll have to see it for yourself and tell me because I'm too close to it. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it does, because I'm always curious as to when you're looking when you watch the film for the first time and you see your design specifically on screen, does it at that moment, if it brings back memories of like the successes and failures while achieving that final product, does that even like pass your head, or it's just a blur at that point?
No, it's totally like all I could actually, that's funny that you say that. All I could see was like the flaws. It was like this is stuff. Oh, I tried to give this note to Weta and they didn't catch it or whatever, right? Like
Right.
this particular little like material transition or whatever on it. Yeah, no, so it's that's all I could see on the first viewing was like, oh, I wish we had caught that. That's bugging me, and now it's like set on film forever, right? But yeah, it's so funny. You can spend so long on a project and then still see things changed. But I guess that's sort of the nature of art, isn't it? It's like it's never what's the quote? It's never finished. It's just done. Like it's just you
I
just hit the
agree.
deadline, sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree with you. I wanted to speak to you about the process of, in general, creative collaboration, because around the time when we started hearing that these sequels are being made for the design industry and the design community, the name Lightstorm Crew became very popular with like all, and it had basically all rock stars of the design world, which is you, Jonathan Berube, Jonathan Bach, John Park, Finney McManus, all of these folks together. And I just want to know, like, how was that, like how were your daily experiences like working with the team where everyone's just bringing their A game to the project? How was that experience for you?
Oh man. Well, yeah, like I said, there was like an initial round that I was not a part of, the more like even prior to me, which I think like John Park and David Levy and a couple
Right.
other, really Fausto De Martini, I think was in that round too. And then of course Ben and Dylan. So I remember hearing about that group of people. It's like, oh wow, that would be a dream to work there. And then, never expecting to sort of get the call. Um, and then when I did sort of eventually join, and then they added even more people, some of the people you mentioned.
Right.
It was overwhelming a little bit, like just like the first time I went and walked through the they had like a gallery room, right, of all the concept art or some fraction of the thousands of pieces that had been produced. Sort of selects best of concept art. And walking through that, and I was like, oh, holy shit, like what have I gotten myself into? Like the quality bar here is so high. So it was just like it was rising to the challenge a little bit, like just sort of having to trust myself that I would work hard enough to sort of try and deliver for them and hope that I don't get let go because I'm not cutting it. And but yeah, like it was, I like to say, and I like to think of it as like it was a crazy group of talent, like to all be under one roof. And there was a few years there where it was like this sort of dream team of people that I just had always dreamed of working with. And I don't know if I'll ever experience anything like that again. Just to have that level of talent all in one physical location too, right? Like all like working together. Like if if I had a question about whatever, surfacing, doing surfacing or materials in CG, I could go walk over to Jonathan Berube's desk, and he was like a VFX art director, I think, at Blizzard. You know, like that was his responsibility for like
Right.
the cinematics at Blizzard, right? So it's like you're just like picking the brain of somebody who um is the best at their particular craft and just
Right.
can just go talk to them at lunch, right? And like, hey, how do you think about this? You know, and then so I definitely think that I just don't know if I'll ever uh get that opportunity again to like be in
Right.
the same physical location as like these sort of best of the best in their particular niches. And even among the creature team, it was like me and then Constantine Sakaris, who is just someone I've always looked up to and always wanted to work with, and just someone I idolized when I was in school.
Right.
And then you're like you find yourself like sitting across from him and just sort of like being able to look over his shoulder and watch him work and just
Right.
see how he thinks and how fast he is. He's super fast. And then for a brief time, like Ian Joyner, who again I
Right.
was like always really looking up to, and Daphne Yap, who was just her brain works in just a different way than a lot of people. Like her sort of design sense is so like unique, and so sort of seeing how she would just she works with a pencil and
Right.
she busts out like dozens of drawings a day of just like really crazy, unique, amazing designs. Um, so yeah, just sharing a room with these people is just it was an insane experience, and I consider myself incredibly lucky. Just sort of
Right.
the timing worked out, the portfolio worked out of like I had kind of stuff in my portfolio that got me in the door, I guess, for
Right.
when they happened to be looking for somebody, and I happened to be in Los Angeles, So it was a lot of like stars aligning, and
Of course.
I definitely don't take that for granted. It was, you know, um, I would like to think that I worked hard to get where I am, but it was also just a lot of luck too.
Of
Um,
course.
uh,
It's always an interesting blend of those two factors for any
yeah,
kind of big opportunity that comes your way.
because there's
Uh,
so many like really really talented people that it's just like, oh, they don't happen to be in Los Angeles, or they didn't, they happen to be busy or whatever. Um, so definitely don't take for granted my
mhm.
position there. Um,
Have you ever had
and
like a bad art job?
oh
And
yeah.
like a job that you really could not, find yourself being successful with?
Yeah, sure. I don't know if I want to get into super specifics, but yeah, definitely have had those. I've had periods, I've had very low periods where I've had multiple in a row. I've had conversations with friends where I'm like, I don't know if this concept art thing is for me. I think I want to maybe go do something else. And then,
Okay.
like go work in some other industry because I just don't like how I've had such a bad stretch for so long that I don't,
Wow.
um
How did you
so
come
I
out of
guess
it then?
uh I guess it's the perspective of like nothing is forever.
Hmm.
And you sort of work through those jobs and then keep, working towards the the better jobs, I guess. And I don't mean better as in terms of like more prestigious or projects
Right.
that you've heard of or whatever, but just like better working environments, better
Right.
teams. Because I've worked for some big jobs where it's like I had a really unpleasant experience.
Right.
Um, and I've worked for some jobs that are, not big tentpole projects that have been really fun and really collaborative. And sorry, you're gonna hear my cat.
Oh, that's not a well.
She's gonna start whining for her
Oh.
for a meal soon. But yeah, so um, yeah, I guess it's the perspective of trying to keep the knowledge of keep yourself grounded of like nothing is sort of forever, and you'll get through this. And I have trying to remember that it's like, okay, I've worked for people and I've had periods where I've been really happy with what I'm doing in the past. So this is temporary. So just try and get through it and keep looking for something else. Um, yeah, but just I guess I try and relay that to your audience that I've had some really rough patches, some really rough stretches of time, sometimes for months or you know longer,
Right.
where I'm just like pretty disappointed with my job or with where things are heading, and it's frustrating, but you can get through them, and that's it's good to try and remember that, I guess, that it's always temporary.
I agree with you because I think the reason why I was asking these questions is that even right now the industry is kind of shifting in many ways because a lot of technological advancements happening. People are getting a little worried about if they're going to get hired eventually or not, how much of their
Yeah,
work will become automated.
yeah.
Computers will be used to do a lot of the creative work. So there's a lot of tension and almost like a fear that goes around. But like hearing you speak about, figuring out a way eventually for yourself really helps as well. And also, the one thing that I noticed, because the nature of the Hollywood industry is, it's like at this point it's pretty openly talked about even amongst people in India. We understand what the nature is, what the kind of work is done. Obviously, the quality bar is phenomenal, but also the kind of work ethic that
Mm,
everyone brings in. That's something that I got to witness kind of firsthand when I started attending events in Europe, such as
mm,
Trojan Horse was a unicorn, and I started meeting. I even sat front row watching Dylan paint for all of us in one of the theaters, and it's just crazy the level of professionalism that you guys bring to the table. So what do you, if you could speak about work ethic in general, like how has that transitioned over time? Because you seem like a very professional artist who knows, like the way you speak of your work, it feels like you're very good at hitting certain beats in terms of creativity, in terms of production schedule. So how do you think about showing a professional, very strong work ethic in this industry? Like how far does that take you actually?
oh, I think it definitely uh is a good value to hold. Yeah, I definitely think it, people notice, um when you're messing around
Mhm.
or not sort of bringing your A game, and I just think that, yeah, like I said, just sort of joining this project, it was like I felt like when I joined, the quality bar for the median level of what I was seeing was higher than what I could achieve at the time,
Right.
um, at joining the project. So it was just like I have to prove myself. Um, I have to rise to that level,
Mhm.
and that just comes through, putting in the hours and nose to the grindstone or whatever the metaphor is. Um, and I think that, yeah, that level of I guess in your words, sort of professionalism, like that, uh, being a serious person and taking, your role seriously. I think people do pay attention to that, and I think it has
Mhm.
served me well. Um, and I think also, I guess one thing I'd like to stress is just being an open-minded and
Mhm.
kind person. Like,
Right.
I there's sort of this, like, I don't know what's the name of those diagrams where there's like a bunch of circles, like a Venn diagram, like
Right, right, right.
it,
Diagrams.
yeah. Yeah, there's like a certain quality bar that you have to hit for sure,
Mhm.
and a certain level that your portfolio has to be, but in order to work with, um in a group under the same roof, you have to be a certain, uh, you have to have a certain level of professionalism and a
Right.
certain, you have to be
Sense
easy
of
to work with.
humility as well.
Yeah.
Right.
And and be able to take direction, and so I think there's like if we're sort of rating people's, professionalism and niceness, and then the quality of their portfolio,
Right.
like if someone is a 10 in their portfolio, they're, you'll put up with some level of assholishness in their personality, but only so far, right? Like, so I think that what I have experienced is that, sorry, the cat's going to join us now. So
Oh, hello.
he's the whining. The someone, in my experience, in a lot of projects, the production would rather take an 8 in portfolio and a 10 in professionalism or kindness or humility, than a 10 in the portfolio and a 2 in kindness.
Right.
So
Right.
I guess the short way of saying that is like, uh a lot of places I worked with are like, they don't want to work with assholes, right?
Of
Like,
course. Of course.
and so if you're difficult to work with, that can be a big impediment,
Right.
even if you're incredibly skilled. Maybe that's changing with like everything or a lot of things going remote, but definitely when you're working in the same room with people for sometimes really long days,
Right.
and you have to take very specific direction, and sometimes it's very stressful, or there's a big deadline and there's tensions are very high. Like, you just want to know that, like, when you're in the trenches with somebody,
Right.
that they're going to be able to handle the stress and not take it out on their peers.
Of course.
So I do think that goes a long way, and to me, it's crazy, like, now that I think about it, like almost all of the, like, pretty senior people, or people who I've met who are concept designers in the film industry, who have been around for a long time, or who are more senior than me, a little older than me, like almost all of them to a T are really nice people,
Right.
and handle stress really well.
Right. Right. Of
Um,
course.
and it's funny because the people that and I don't want to name any names, but there are really, really talented people who are more senior than me that, they don't get as much work because it's sort of known that they're, um, you know, not as easy to work with.
Right.
And
Right.
and so there is, I guess, getting back to the Venn diagram, there's a bit of like some overlap of like being a good person, being talented, and the amount of, um uh if talent and good person is,
Right.
two separate parts of the bubble, you want that person that's in the middle.
Of course. Of course. I think to expand a little bit on this, because the the production process, like as an artist, because the way we learn, we adapt skills as we grow, we start finding audiences who resonate with our work. And for some people, probably there's a certain sense of celebrity mindset that builds. But
Yeah,
also, this industry is very much about, like, if you work in it, you are, even if you play a very important role, you are still playing a small bit.
yeah,
And there are multiple people who have to get a lot of things done in order to, like, they'll take, like, you finish your role and then someone else's role begins from there. So if
yeah.
you are bringing a certain ego which does not resonate with the goal of the project, then you are being a liability more than an asset at that point.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good way to put it. You put it a lot more succinctly than I did.
Yeah, yeah, because
But
as you were talking about like veteran artists who are very humble, like I think two people who come to my mind immediately is Ian McKagan and Crash McCreary. Like you
yeah,
listen to them talk, and there's the most gentle,
no,
like
I've
humble human beings out
been lucky
there.
enough to work with Crash, and yeah, he's exactly the type of person I'm thinking
Yeah.
of. Like, he was my boss on a couple of projects, and
Oh, lovely.
yeah, no, he is, just an awesome person, right? At least in my experience, like, just a, like you're saying, very kind, very humble, easy to work with. Um, you know, takes and gives direction very well.
Right.
And you want to be in the room with that person. So he's also just incredibly talented, right? Like,
Right.
obviously, but that, I think, at a certain level, that's sort of a given. Like,
Mhm.
everybody at a certain level is gonna be like at least decent at their job in terms of like technical ability.
Of course.
So yeah, what I found is like the people that last for a long time, they are easy to work with, and
Right.
yeah.
I think some artists in general, they find it easier to remove the self aspect from their work. They know that this needs to be done whether I do it or not. Because so if I get a chance to do it, like for example, because when I listen to you talk about your task, it feels like you understand that it's not just you doing it, but
Oh, of course,
this
yeah,
needs to be done no matter what, whether I exist in this project or I don't. Right.
right.
So if I get that opportunity to do this, let's just remove the self completely and just get this thing done to the best of its abilities.
Well, and I think that's an important perspective, like you're saying, to keep in mind of like remove trying to. It's easy to get an ego when you work on like, oh, I worked on these big projects that people have heard
Right.
of, right? But like you're also like highly replaceable.
Of
And
course.
like and remembering that I think is important of like if I were to get hit by a bus tomorrow, like yeah, they would put somebody in my job pretty
Right.
quickly. Because there's a lot of people really eager to do it and people who are equally as talented as me, right? If not more so. So I think that that's just an important perspective to maintain. I also like just an anecdote, like I had we went to like a sort of a crew rap party kind of thing with a bunch of the Avatar crew, and um I I got to meet a bunch of the crew members who worked on the same project as me in other departments. It's a massive project, right? Like
Of
thousands of
course.
people worked on it, and so it was like I'm meeting people in other departments who worked probably as long on the project as I did, or close to it, and never met them before, you know.
Right.
And then I would say like, oh hey, here's what I did. I helped design the skim wing and a little bit of the Tulkun, and you would meet someone that was like they also worked on those things,
Right.
just later on down the pipeline, and so I think it's important to remember that we feel like we have a lot of influence, and we do, like, relatively so, but you are bringing something of your thought process to the table, but ultimately you are, like you're saying, a relatively small piece of the overall
Also,
puzzle.
very initial piece of the puzzle. There are so
Yeah,
many steps beyond that stage as well.
yeah, and I think that's an important, some level of trying to keep a clear head about things, I think is important. um yeah, yeah, it's a good thing to remember.
Of course. Uh, Wanted to speak to you about your because your job seems like a very stressful and like it feels like it takes up a lot of your time in general to get a lot of these things done. So like how do you balance your day out in general? Like are you someone who's very good at maintaining an interesting balance between your work time and time with family? Like how did that evolve for you? Because for a lot of people, because I think for creators that line gets blurry as to where a project stops being a professional project and starts becoming a creative endeavor, and then your
Yeah,
professional time kind of seeps into your personal time as well, right? And
yeah,
it sounds interesting when you're younger, but then as you start growing older, other responsibilities come to you. Like you are married, you have a family, so there are multiple things. You cannot just be a creative 24 hours a day. Essentially, you have
yeah.
to take care of other things. So how do you think about that balance in your life?
Well, I don't have children yet, but
Mm-hmm.
I do have a partner. And so I do consciously sort of try and set aside time to be with her, right?
Mm-hmm.
Out of my day or my week. And that sometimes comes at the expense of saying no to other things, right?
Of
Like
course.
it's like a matter of sort of priority, and there was sort of a conscious decision of like prioritizing my relationship with my now
Mm-hmm.
wife over sometimes professional aspirations.
Right.
Um, Even though I'm a very, as you observed, like a very like like my profession is a big part of my drive as well, right? Like it's also very high on the priority list. Um, so I would say that there's and I had a mentor sort of slash friend, Brian Wynia, and I don't know if you're familiar with his work. He's another creature designer, very talented guy, and he's now I think a creative director at a game studio.
I see.
But he was a teacher and mentor of mine in school, and I remember asking him this kind of question, and I was like, I can't remember how it came up, but it was like, I don't know how to like make time for work, make time for at the time probably dating or something, and then make
Right.
time for personal work and freelance and like and and he was like something to the effect of like, well, the way I like to imagine it is you have to keep a bunch of plates spinning in the air, right? Sort of
Right.
like spinning plates on your
Right.
finger or whatever, just sort of thinking it's sort of a metaphor, right? And all you got to do is keep them spinning. Sometimes you'll spin some of them faster than others.
Mhm.
And sometimes, you know, they'll spin a little slower, but all you want to do is you don't want to drop them and break them. Right.
Right.
So you
That's a
just got to keep
very
them
interesting
spinning.
analogy. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it's more like at certain times in my life, there's different seasons of life, right? Where it's like,
Mhm.
okay, there was a period on early on Avatar where I first got hired, and like I said, I saw the gallery and everything. I was like, okay, I got to work really hard to like
Right.
make my mark here and make them prove that I'm worthy of being kept here. And so I worked super hard for like a good several years, and I was, you know, if there was a meeting coming, I would, try and show up to work early and put in a few
Right.
extra hours or whatever. Um, and then there are periods where it's like, I recently got married, and so that was the
Congratulations, by the
priority
way.
was, oh, thank you. Thanks so much. But so that became like a little bit of a priority, and
Right.
I'm still working hard at work. I'm just not working as hard as when I was like trying to prove myself to like
Right.
to prove my value to keep me around kind of thing. So it's spinning the relationship plate and the professional plate, and sometimes the professional plate is spinning a little
Right.
faster and sometimes a little slower, but you just don't want to drop them.
Also, I think like because at a younger stage, the fear of not doing your part and losing on an opportunity is bigger
Yeah,
than taking care of yourself. Because as you said, there's like like all of these things are like different planets in your solar system. Essentially, everything
yeah,
like you like no one, not one is like overtly prioritized over the other. You have to keep all of them going just to keep a centered, grounded self. Essentially, when you're younger, it gets very difficult because I remember myself being extremely scared, and then that led to years of anxiety as to like, but like I would probably sleep at 4:30 and I would wake up at 6:30 again and start working, and that went on for almost 1.5 years. So
wow,
that was crazy. And now
yeah,
I realize, and the sad part is that if I understood that the like people who I'm working with, they will understand if I had to take a little bit of a break or at least take a few steps, they would understand because even they have families as well. I was
yeah.
not smart enough to have that process in my head, that thought in my head. But now that's why I'm being able to balance things a little better. But I guess that when you were younger, like that really, like that fear stays in a lot of us,
Oh,
essentially.
totally. Yeah, no, and I was the same
Yeah.
way. It- you know, and I think it comes from an anxiety of like, especially when you're very young and very green and haven't done a lot of work yet, and you're trying to prove
Mhm.
yourself. Um, yeah, just like you feel like you need to compensate with your lack of experience,
Right.
to with just pure sort of
Just showing up at every moment as you
yeah,
can.
and I think there's some value in that as long as it's done safely and you're not
Yeah.
harming yourself, right? Because I think another thing that artists and creatives uh forget is to sort of take care of their bodies. Um
Right. I agree
and
with
I
you.
I've known of people who do what I do who have injured themselves, right? Like
Mhm.
just they get wrist injuries or back injuries from sitting too long or drawing too much or whatever.
Right.
And then once you do that, then you're out of commission for longer, right? So it's just it's not worth it. So one of those plates I try and keep spinning
Right.
is working out, and staying active, because that's also very important. For
Right.
just, even if I look at it from purely as like, I need this body to stay with me for a long period of time for me to,
Right.
if I want to keep doing this, um, that uh, that aspect is also important. And I know a lot of people that ignore that, and then that can sort of bite you later.
Right.
So, I try and set aside 45 minutes a day, something like that, to do a workout. And if I skip that too many days in a row, then I'm crabby, and
Right.
my wife can tell when I but there's occasional deadlines or something where it's like, okay, I don't have time for this, but then I better, as soon as the deadline is over, I better like get back to it, and just um don't let that go, because that's also very important, even purely from a selfish standpoint of like, I need to do this to keep working, right?
Right.
um so yeah, word of advice to young and aspiring and up and coming
Right.
people in your audience, like, don't ignore that stuff. It's because
No, absolutely.
you're only in your 20s or whatever for so
Right.
long, and it, I'd like to, sort of, fate willing, assuming the robots don't come and take our jobs, I'd like to keep doing this, um, and for a while, and so I need this body to
Of
keep
course.
me doing it. Yeah.
It's interesting because last year, we found out that Kim Jong-il passed away,
Right.
and I met him a week before he passed away because
Wow.
he was doing, or I think it was 2 weeks before that, because we attended an event in Portugal, and this was almost, I think, the third time that I've seen him perform live. And when I heard the news, and it was obviously a shock as it came,
Yeah.
but then I also
Yeah.
realized that of course it would have hurt his health, because he's someone who, like, he embodies the brand of this
Right.
incredible artist, right? Like, his work has a lot more value when he himself is performing it out there. So he's
Right.
having to travel across the world, traveling multiple time zones. Probably stress gets in the way. You're sitting and drawing constantly. I started feeling, because for someone, he's not that old. He's very youthful, incredible sense of humor, amazing person. You would never get the sense that he is at any point like old, yeah,
Wasn't he in his
emotionally.
like 40s or
Yeah,
something?
I
How
think he
old
was
is he?
40. I think he was 48, maybe.
Yeah,
Not an
that's
age
crazy.
where people, uh like, your life would end. Like, it was crazy to hear that. But then I started thinking that probably the lifestyle itself had somewhat, like, these are just like, I'm making pretty drastic assumptions,
Right.
but it felt that that's when I started thinking, because even post, the whole period of COVID, a lot of us, I don't know if, did you also had COVID, like, did you also get COVID at some point?
I did get it. Yeah, actually, just recently,
Oh wow.
I dodged it for the for a couple of years, and then I got
Right.
it over last holiday, December. My wife gave it to me. Once
Right.
once we finally stopped taking off our masks and
I
going out in
see. I
public and stuff,
see.
that's when we got it.
But I guess you understand, like, because even COVID really affects you, even like long after you've actually recovered from the primary symptoms of it. And a lot of people, I recently started noticing a lot of people in India who they start
Mm,
passing away at the age of 40, essentially,
yeah.
just because of like overworking themselves, stress and everything. So that's why I want to really point out and understand how your life has been and how you balance these things out as well.
I mean, I think the lesson, and the sort of the philosophy, I think, comes from my father,
Mm-hmm.
because he lost his brother uh, at a young age, and I don't want to. It's probably
Of
not
course.
for me to get into too many specifics, but that
Of course.
it was somewhat of a lifestyle sort of thing, and that had a big impact on my father,
Mm-hmm.
who then became a lot more focused on his health and started running. And now my dad, who's retired, he
Right.
does triathlons, he's he's in the old guy age group. Sorry about the cat, but
Okay.
that was something that came out of, I think, that perspective, and I think that got instilled in me of like, I would rather be maybe if being an A plus legendary artist requires me to live that sort of lifestyle where I uh you know don't take care of myself and am at risk for health problems later, I would rather be a B plus artist
Right.
and then live to retirement age. um it I don't know if that's a fair analogy or what, but
It's an
I hope that
interesting one. It's an interesting one mostly because we have seen so many stories of artists like truly living their art essentially to a
yeah.
point where their work becomes as much an identity for themselves, right? So, and this is where like the conversation around art and creativity becomes very interesting, but also confusing as well. And that also makes me think about like colleges where you're being graded about your in terms of your ability in producing art, and I'm like, how do we even grade someone based on their artistic abilities? Like, how it's such a weird place to say that this art is better than that art. So right, every like it becomes a it's a rabbit hole of its own, to be frank with you. But it's interesting how a lot of artists like start really embodying their work essentially, and that leads to certain choices that they make, which is not really beneficial for them, their human side of their
Right.
life,
Yeah. Yeah.
and but it helps creatively, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's to each their own, and I'm
Right.
certainly not judging anyone who makes
Of
that
course.
decision. I guess just for me, I would rather take care of my body and be around for my loved ones. As, if fate is willing, you never know, but
Of course.
I would at least try and increase my odds
Right.
by taking care of myself. So at least that's my perspective. And I think that, like, if it's a trade-off, right? Like, if the difference is, you know um skipping the workouts and the eating healthy and the sleeping, to become just that much better an artist, I don't think that that trade-off is worth it in the long run, in my opinion. But it's just, I don't fault anybody who makes that decision.
Of course. Of course. Wow. Uh, Zach, this has been amazing, by the way. I've been, I don't know, I'm really toning myself down when I speak to you, but I've been excited for the last few months just waiting to sit with you
Oh,
and
you're too
discuss.
kind.
Yeah, because I really respect you and a lot of other artists that I have the opportunity to see working at the highest state of ability in terms of creative potential, and you're someone who resonates so deeply with me, and I whenever I spoke with you, there was this sense of humility that really connected to me, and it made me want to speak to even more. So I really appreciate you for taking that time to make this make this happen as well.
Oh yeah, and thank you so much for dealing with my crazy schedule and everything. And I think that's another sort of, I guess, just really quickly, that's another sort of perspective that I like to take, is that all of these people that we look up to, Crash McCreary or whatever, right? Like,
Right.
who was one of my idols when I was, coming up, and then you meet them, and then they're just people, right? Like, they're
Of
just
course.
another person who is maybe he's further along on his artistic journey than I am, and
Right.
he's had more time, and yes, he's incredibly talented, and works incredibly hard, and has earned his sort of skill. But he's also just like, he's a dad, right? Like, he's a
Right.
guy, and so I think there's this weird culture that I think we have as a community, where with this sort of like hero worship of like these people that's like, oh, this person
Right.
worked on this thing, so they're better than me, and I
Right.
just I don't like to subscribe to that
Mhm.
kind of thinking, right? Like, there's so many talented people, so many hardworking people that I've met or who I've met online, yourself included, and this person has worked on this thing or this person hasn't. There's not a whole lot of sometimes rhyme or reason to it. Sometimes it's like I have the luxury of living in a place that is sort of the one of the epicenters of entertainment, right? So it gave me some advantages, but it doesn't make me any more or less skilled than people who didn't grow up in those places, right? And so some people, I've met people that have traveled further than me than to end up somewhere and um or had bigger hurdles to climb from their sort of starting point in life, you know, um, than I did. And so I guess it's just I appreciate the compliment and thank you so much. But yeah, I hope that I don't know what I'm trying to say, but that everybody yeah, I lost my train of thought, but
Oh, that's good. That's
hopefully,
I
hopefully
honestly
I got the point
beautiful.
across.
Of course you did. Like I mean, as you said that, I remember a time where I had the whole concept of hero worship quite a bit. And one of my mentors, when we attended art events, and he specifically asked me that when you speak to another artist who you really respect, don't keep this perspective of a fan and just speak to them as another person. Just try to get to know them a little, because even for them, if they want to connect with you, even if at some point they want to work with you, it's always easier for them to look at you as like a companion, rather than someone who's trying to become you or someone who like worships you. So just having that person on an equal level, on a humanly equal level, always helps you, take the conversation forward. And I think that has allowed me in many ways to be able to reach out to folks like you. Even like before today's conversation, for a while I was like, okay, because I'm a very anxiety driven person. Like I get very anxious about,
Oh, I am
in
too.
terms
Yeah.
of it's really scary for me. But once I started talking to you, I started feeling very comfortable, and that honestly that speaks to your energy as well, which I really resonated with. So I really
Oh,
appreciated
thank
this
you.
time with you as
Yeah,
well.
me too. Yeah, likewise. Yeah, I think it's an important perspective to keep. That's like
Mhm.
all of these people that we look up to, and I've had that happen to me multiple times
Right.
where, yeah, it's like I really look up to this artist and then I meet them in person or I am fortunate enough to work with them and then they turn out to be just a person. And then you realize that like, oh, okay, like, when I was first starting out and I was in my 20s or whatever, and then it's like, oh, I'm not as good as David Levy or whatever, who
Mhm.
I've been working with, right? And then and who I really looked up to when I was a student, and then it's like, okay, well, that person at one point was in their 20s and where
Of
I
course.
am, right? And like, and so there's a perspective that is it's easier to maintain once you've been through it, but try
Right.
and keep the perspective of like they don't even have an expectation of you to be where they are because they're further along than you, right? Like
That's
they
true.
might be, older than you, or they've had certain advantages that allowed them to get an education,
And they also
an art
somewhere
education.
understand, right? They also understand at some level that you will be taking your own path as you
Yeah,
take those steps. Like it doesn't have to be the same linear thing that
right.
that artist at that point is thinking about. They'll probably start resonating with something completely different from this, and they'll become incredible in that field essentially.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And yeah, I think that's a incredibly well put. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much, Zach. I hope I
Yeah.
didn't take up too much of your time.
No,
This was
no.
this was amazing. I really appreciate you taking this time out, and I hope to really meet you in person at some point as well.
Yeah, let me know
Uh,
if you ever make it to the States, or I'll let you know if I ever make it to one of these Europe events, it sounds like,
of
or
course, just find yourself in India at some point if you take a trip,
yeah.
and just let me know. I'll
I
definitely
I
come and
went
meet up with you.
once.
Oh, you
I
did?
went once on we my wife and I took a trip to northern India,
Okay.
Rajasthan,
Oh, lovely.
and yeah, just very touristy. So
Right.
but I would love to go back. It was probably, I mean, certainly one of the most beautiful places I've ever been, and just amazing sort of culture, and fell in love with it. So I would love to go back. at some
You're
point.
obviously always welcome. Just let me know whenever you do. I'll make sure that I take the role of a tour guide for you. But thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Really
All right.
appreciate it.